Hello. Um, I'm really grateful to be here today speaking to you about Dona Marinha and the water-centric forgotten wisdom. So, presenting myself, I'm Sofia, and I'm a designer by academic training, a teacher by chance, a writer by visceral necessity, and an independent researcher by natural curiosity. I am a mammal, an author, a woman, and a question weaver. So I have 9 published books in Portuguese, and I work with Portuguese folk tales from an eco-mythological perspective. I try to lift the veils of Christianity and modernity that are burying those tales in our psyches and our souls with them. So in this presentation, firstly, I will tell an old story, and it's a tale of a silent ocean. It's an offering, really, this presentation, from an original myth that was recorded in the 14th century. So after that, I will frame the political contexts and historical premises from where this tale comes from. And in my main interest, my main focus is to find the psychic and cultural threads that enable such a story to be woven and registered in the first place, uncovering the undercurrents of the Eurocentric psyche. So we have a lot to cover, and I will continue. But I just want to address that this presentation is really about what we forgot. And I can tell you that only from my own context, which is here in Portugal, in the westernmost point of the big Eurasian continent. So all my life I've lived here, perched on these lands, folded over the Atlantic Ocean. And people who live here, they do know and they do understand that the oceanic habitat does not end where the water ends, because we live deep entrenched in salty atmospheres and humid winters. So we are completely enveloped within the ocean itself. However, we kind of forgotten this deeply ecological wisdom of the ocean itself. There are a lot of remains, archaeological remains along these coasts. Along these coasts also, since the 1400s, ships have sailed throughout the world discovering what was never lost, violently conquering and subduing other ecologies and ways of knowing, coalescing with a deep oceanic consciousness and ecological entanglement is a much-needed step toward Portuguese cultural maturity. Not by recovering a pure past or a new future, but in a movement that fosters transformation. The Portuguese Atlantic-facing peoples claimed the human intelligence in the technique apparatus for controlling the open ocean in the navigation of the early 1400s, in a narrative of controlling the beast, subduing and silencing the waters, thus reducing their sovereignty and complexity to a mere resource, enslaving people and spices in mere trading waterways. Nowadays, these liminal landscapes are the beach resort of Northern Europe, with tourism gentrifying the frail oceanic ecosystem. So I have a small timeline that I want us to take some time with. And this timeline brings us to the early primeval water deities that are around our territory. Because we, of course, being a very ancient territory, we have a very deep relation to water and all of its deities. So this timeline is to show us that we have a long and ancient relation to water deities. From 5,000-year-old rock-carved tombs in the oceanic precipice and ancient megaliths facing the western deep and salty waters, along with freshwater and Wales' native deities. Until the 19th century, it was usual to document such encounters with official documents, from a delegation going to Rome to describe a Triton encounter, to a Portuguese king, Dom Manuel, having 2 pet mermaids in the 1500s. Inquisition Cardinal Torquemada, who lived between the 14th and the 15th centuries, officially reports the presence and legacy of seamen in the Galician Portuguese coast. Men here descend from Tritons, and Tritons are common in these shores, he declared. And to this day, a lot of people believe that they are direct descendants from mermaids. I want to call forth the importance of Bishop Martin de Braga, the Correctione Rusticorum from the 6th century of the Common Era. And the bishop tells everyone here, 1500 years ago, that people should not pray to the waters or to the water divinities or beings, because the waters were not sacred, nor the stones, nor the trees, because all of nature was composed of demons, of falling demons. And so people could only pray to the skies. And so I do believe that, of course, Roman colonization and Muslim colonization had a lot to do with structures and organizing structures of water for agriculture and industries at the time. But the bishop's message is a key message that severs the direct connection with these deities and with these ancient beings. And we have there on the timeline Dom Pedro de Barcelos and the Book of Lineages in the 1400s about the story that I'm going to tell you. So this is the Book of Lineages, and the Book of Lineages was written in the 14th century by Dom Pedro de Barcelos, which was a son of a king, a bastard son of a king. And the story goes like this. There was this knight, and he was a hunter and a knight, and he found a sleeping woman by the sea. And he said, "Oh, she's so beautiful. Please take her to my castle." And so their squires, they took the woman. She tried to escape, but she couldn't escape. And so she was taken to the palace. Oh, on the palace, they named her Dona Marinha, which means sea woman. And Dona Marinha, she didn't speak. She didn't say a word, but she had a lot of children by this man, Dom Froilão. And Dom Froilão was kind of in love with her, but he was kind of annoyed that she didn't speak. One day, he ordered a bonfire to be made in his palace. She came from outside the city and brought her son with her, whom she loved as much as her heart. Dom Froilão went to get him and tried to send her son to the bonfire. And she was so angry that she screamed. And when she screamed, she threw a piece of meat from her mouth. And from then on, she was able to speak. And Dom Froilão took her as his wife and married her. So it is important for us to understand the historical context from which these stories are weaved. And from the 12th century onwards, European noble knights marry mystical beings belonging to the natural world. And these mystical beings grant them prosperity and unique progeny. So it's a deceptively simple narrative, Dona Marinha's tale, but it refers to the constant inner colonization and domestication that takes place in the European tradition. The separation of place, body, and psyche, iterated in 1,000 different nuances. In the 14th century, the Galician Portuguese family of Marinhos exercised their ownership and power through a mythical marriage to a very beautiful, tamed, harmless, and silent woman forcibly taken by the seashore, Dona Marinha. And so Dorothy Jones writes in her essay, Woman, Place, and Myth-Making, a Post-Colonial Perspective, that woman and place are often mythologically intertwined in relation to each other. And here we pick up on this theme, which is a kind of a common theme, but throughout the 19th century, and here we are speaking of the 14th century, of the silent mermaid. So Dona Marinha, she appears as a harmless, submissive, and shy being. Somehow she has lost her mythical character, her name, and her voice. And so I'm picking up the threads of the works of Annie Spratt, the rape trauma archetype and the chase narrative, along with Pauline Tam's metaphorical castration voice. So what I mean by this is that the once sacred and fierce hybrid creature is transformed into an innocent and fearful woman due to her compromised voice. After all, Dona Marinha is an ancient daughter of the eternal sea, who, upon being kidnapped, has forgotten the language of the ocean, which is a powerful metaphor for the amnesia of the modern culture and its enclosure in a hall of mirrors. Has she been silenced? Or have we lost the ability to really listen? This is a punishment because the way we treat water is the way we treat ourselves. Ultimately, Dona Marinha was left without the memory of her oceanic origins, living as symbolically banished and trapped on dry earth. So these primordial monsters, throughout this history of domestication of these monsters, the sirens became less grotesque and more human, depending less on their intensive vocal powers and moving on to play harps, flutes, lyres, and drums. Sirens who dive into this rescue with us are active characters in this deep legacy of animistic trance. They embody the chanting tides, the oceanic rumble, the howling winds, the cries of seagulls and other seabirds. Demons, before they were reduced to seductive demons, the sirens were ecosystemic monsters, unconsciously marking dangerous areas. Through nightmares, madness, fervor, and intense passion, ignorant and unwary sailors were deceived by the beautiful voices of these sea monsters. But throughout this history of domestication, the sirens became less grotesque and more human, depending less on their intense vocal powers and moving on to play harps, flutes, lyres, and drums. Their enchanting abilities were still linked to oracular powers and also could enter dreams, whispering directly into the ears of sailors and fishermen on the darkest of nights. It is important to note that the sounds vocalized by the mermaids and sailors are not verbal, being screams, howls, or insinuating melodic voices heard on foggy nights near the ocean shores. We have a ton of local water deities, and they're connected to ancient mysteric cults of menstruation, death, fertility. And Nabia or Navia is one of them, is the ancient river goddess of the northern part of the Iberian territory. And each river, each tributary has its own particular deity. We have two particular deities, the Moras, which are the kind of a snaky, Ophidian freshwater woman, and the marine goat fairies. What is important here in these written and oral accounts is that mermaids and sirens are wild and vicious creatures that create and feed on storms, changing and intensifying weather, creating gigantic waves, violent winds, and dangerous currents. Ecology translated into myth. From the earliest myths, they have both contrasting and symbiotic ties with death, as they take human souls crossing dimensions. And what about the links to the ecosystems they mythologically represent? The knowledge woven into mythic narratives is indeed a legitimate form of consciousness relation. Since time immemorial, natural forces in their spontaneous or pattern events have been portrayed as mythological figures, reflecting oral and collective memory and transmitting complex ecological processes over generations. So, what happens here is that the forgetfulness and disregard for the ecological cycle of the all-pervading water and tears, sweat, sap, dew, rain, ice, or sea has silenced this ancient dialogue, crystallizing its fluid rhythm and inevitable movement. The deep fear of impermanence repressed the water-centered consciousness. And we have the goat mermaid here, which is a hybrid from woman, fish, and goat, and Dona Marinha was perhaps one of these characters also. So the goat mermaid is a Portuguese marine fairy, this is a popular mythical figure, and the coastal people call them marinhas, or marine women, or marine fairies. And they are described physically in 18th century sunken ship journal. And it says that she has all perfections of human woman up to her waist, which they are really beautiful, but they are disfigured by their long ears, and then they have goat feet with fish scales from the waist down, of course. And it is important to remember that sea goats are a common myth because it was believed in underwater meadows where herbivores grazed. It was also believed that mermaids often came to land meadows by the ocean or by the sea. These mystical sea fairy women are hybrids, and they do not use musical instruments, which kind of attests for their antiquity. These archaic voices can induce auditory hallucinations, nightmares, or even madness. By being so old, they hold memories and affinities with goats, the sea, and the ancient stories of star mapping and seasonal calendars, recalling the gold calendar mentioned at the very beginning. By their antiquity, they hold memories and affinities with goats, the sea, and ancient stories of star mapping and seasonal calendars. This is a mythical realm that relates to primeval gods such as Ea, Oannes, Pricus, or Capricorn, all hybrids of fish and goat. The most obvious connection to the mythical goats of the sea is the astrological Capricorn, a goatfish constellation whose name means horn of the goat. In the watery, speculative mantle we have woven, so far, I recall the related concept of the cornucopia, the ancient horn of plenty, filled with fruits and vegetables held by maternutrices, a trio of women sitting, nursing, or holding cups in pre-Christianized Europe. So, these mythical marine entities synthesize the sage and the goat, retaining the organic matrix of seasonal cycles and weather patterns in a wild and fierce aquatic creature. Recalling the tale of Dona Marinha, although she is directly named as a Portuguese siren, there is no obvious reference to goat feet. However, there are curious and less obvious connections to the goat tradition. Dona Marinha, future's husband, Dom Froilão, is presented as a hunter and a knight. And this knight, from his name, Froilão, we can attest that he has land and a castle. And the castle is a castle that was in the ancient territory, northern territory of Cora, recorded in 1156. And this word means construction in goat stone, referring to the characteristic of the soil, which is quite stony and made of rocks, a natural territory for goats. So Dom Froilão is in fact a noble knight whose properties relate to rocks, goats, and a rescued goat mermaid. So last words. These last words speak directly to the framing of the character of the siren through the culture based on conquest and extraction, the abyssal monster to be conquered, extracting all its mysteries, ignoring the synchronic coherence of life's interpretation in us. This superficiality makes us readily confuse the colonial maps with wild, complex, living territory. These ancient entities representing and guarding ecosystemic wisdom are diminished by being just desecrated and greedy, fear-inducing demons, like the echo of the imperial and conquest culture that mutilated them. The only possible solution to keep humanity safe from these mythical monsters was to control, tame, rape, and silence them, instead of claiming the place of symbiotic ocean and body-centered wisdom of somatic consciousness in flux. But we can still be water, sing water, sacred and ecstatically. Of course, the sirens have always been wild, hybrid, paradoxical creatures not to be conquered, but to be listened to. Thank you. For the full essay, this is just a small drop of the oceanic consciousness that we've lost. I leave you with the references for my work also. Thank you very much.